Hello everyone, welcome back. Tonight we are going to dive into the WPF DataGrid. It was something that was requested a couple times on YouTube and various other things, so I figured let's do it. Let's dive in. On previous streams I've commented multiple times that in my opinion, the WPF DataGrid is the most complex control of everything that comes in the box. Which is to say, a lot of people end up using it. It gets used incorrectly. It causes a lot of confusion. If people are just starting out, I usually tell them, don't go with the data grid. Like, it is very powerful. There's a lot you can do with it, but it's also difficult and unwieldy. And especially if you aren't familiar with a lot of the data binding concepts, styling, that sort of thing, it can get very difficult to understand what is going on very quickly. So I figure we will take a look at it, and then I'm also going to mention the Material Design and XAML project has a couple helpers that make it a little bit easier to work with. So we'll take a look at why we might need those and how those help and all that kind of fun jazz. So, okay, if I can remember how to do this. Whatcha! There we go. Okay, Material Design and XAML project. We're going to come back to this later. Okay, so I started with a empty folder. So we'll just do this. So .NET new, let's see, WPF. So if anybody wants this thing, ooh, hang on while we're doing this. Pro tip, you have to spell .NET with 2 T's, not 1. In case you were wondering. Apparently I have installed multiple things. Yeah, 2 T's, not 1. Yeah, details. If anyone is interested in the template that I'm using, you can get it here. It is one that 1T not 0. It is my own WPF template that I personally like and think it is the best way to do WPF development. So if you are getting started and you want a somewhat opinionated, we'll call it highly opinionated, template that will actually build you up a full-on project with Kevin's preferred way of doing things, well, here you go. Have at it. Okay, so we are going to start here. Okay, so the problem that I have with most data grids is the tutorials that people write for them. Quite often they show you the easy path and then they skip over all the hard stuff. So we're going to do the same thing. I will show you the easy path and then I will show you why it is horrible and bad. So let's start with this. To work with a data grid, we're going to need some data to work with. So let's start with this. Public class user. Let's see. And then we're going to make this an observable object. So just for reference, I am using the MVVM toolkit. So if you have not seen Community Toolkit MVVM, search previous videos by me. You'll find some great tutorials. They're awesome. This library is amazing and makes all of your MVVM needs much simpler. So let's see. Let's do private string name. What else does the user have? Private int age. Thank you, Copilot. You are wonderful. And we're going to make these nullable so it shuts up and stops yelling at me. What's your problem here? Using partial modifier. Right. We need to make the class partial. Huzzah. Okay. And then go off and be in your own file. Okay. So next thing we need is we need a observable collection of these things. User, users, get, new. Okay, Copilot, I would like you to automatically generate me some data. Generate 10 random users. Go, Copilot. Come on, Copilot, do the work for me. Didn't really need that line. No, that's all you got? Copilot, you suck. Okay, users dot add new user name. Come on, Copilot, give me something. Joe. Zhao, I guess. Age 3, because that sounds great. Okay, Copilot, rinse, repeat, do it again. Fine, we'll do that. That'll work. Okay, so it got around to it. It didn't do a great job, but you know what? Whatever. You can't complain too much. Okay, so we got ourselves generate 10 random users. We naturally have 11 because counting is hard. Yeah, that did not do what we wanted, so whatever. Okay, so we have our users. We're going to just delete the rest of the contents of this view model because we don't care about it. Yep, delete all this, delete all this, delete all that. Great, great, great. Go away. Okay, so now let's go back to our view. We're going to do the thing that everyone else does. I don't really care about that. We can leave the exit and the menu in for now. We're going to come in here. We're going to do data grid, item source, binding users. Okay, and this is where most people stop, right? They show off this. Let's show it off because this is the epic part of DataGrid, right? And of course it puts it on the wrong thing. Booyah. I have literally done DataGrid, item source, binding users, done nothing else, and we're off to the races. I've got a user here. I can make, you know, user 0 be an age 42 because 42 is obviously the age of everyone. And we have a full setup data grid. We can do this. We can do some fancy sorting. We can sort by name, right? All of that works. Everyone's happy. And this is where people usually stop with data grid. And they're like, look how easy that was. You make a collection, you make it observable. This is not strictly necessary here because we're adding all the items in the constructor, so whatever, but we'll get to add, remove later. So the fact that this is an observable collection will become meaningful. But we didn't even have to name any columns or anything. It just figured it all out for us. Isn't that great? Yeah, this is where the easy ends and the hard begins. Okay? So, step one. The first problem with DataGrid is this property here, auto generate columns. This defaults to true. This is one of my biggest beefs with the WPF library. The fact that this sucker defaults to true. Because it gives this false illusion of being correct, and then, you know, let's do this, you know, public string password, right? So we're just going to do this, right? You know, users need to have a password for some reason. Recompile, relaunch. Yeah, shut up. I know it's declared non-nullable, doesn't work. But oh, look at that. It auto put all of this in. This is what sucks right here, is because it defaults to auto generate columns, it will look at every single property that you have. And I've been intentional here. I've specifically gone through and made properties that didn't have, we'll say, multiple words in them, right? You know, last name, right? This type of thing here, because generally when we name things in C#, we do Pascal case, but the name that you want to show to the user is almost never going to be the name of your property. That is rarely what you want. Unless all of your properties are nice, simple, easy, short names, maybe. The problem I have with the auto-generate columns, though, is it assumes that that's correct. And a simple addition of a property, whether you intended to expose it or not, magically makes it up. So, yuck, 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 yuck. Okay, so, step one with DataGrid. Turn that sucker off. Okay. Next. Once you turn that off, you will then find that you need to go through and actually, you should close your tag correctly, is we now need to stop that. We now need to actually go through and set up the columns ourselves. So DataGrid columns. Okay, format. Stop helping me. Sorry, I've got XAML XAML styler on, and it is being helpful. Sometimes too helpful. Okay, so we have, in the box, you have a handful of built-in column types. The most common type that you are probably going to work with is going to be the text column, right? Look at that. See that? Copilot's already on point. Okay, Copilot, do the next one for me. Thanks. Great. So we have now successfully gotten ourselves... Why did that go to 4 spaces? Huh. I've got some weird conflict between my editor config and my XAML styler that are not happy. I should add that into my default template. Okay. Suffice to say, relaunch. Where's my cup? There we are. Don't worry. Green cup, green Mountain Dew. It works. Green screen makes it invisible. Also lower the calories. At least I'm pretty sure that's how that works. No, that's one thing I meant to do. I meant to change out my template to have an icon here. One of these streams, I'm going to end up going through and adding a bunch of these little niceties to my templates that I feel like should just be in the box so people know, hey, swap this file. Now you have your icon. Bippity-boppity-booyah. Okay, so you'll note name, age. More importantly, if we want to reorder these columns, we can now reorder the columns. That's what we want. Okay, UB topmost. Okay, I am only setting topmost to true for the purposes of streaming. I don't recommend it in most situations, but it is rather convenient for me to be able to type in Visual Studio and have this window stay on top so everyone can see it. So for reference. Okay. So for example, being able to swap the columns around, change up how this is going. This is a much simpler way. Again, auto generate columns, evil, burn it to the ground. Don't leverage it. Okay. There's one thing I had pulled to the side. I do also want to call out this guy here. So there is quite a bit of docs around here on DataGrid. And I think I'm just going to pull this up. And I'm going to just drop it into chat for anybody who wants to play along. So .NET docs, don't be weirded out by the fact that this says .NET framework stuff. WPF, its blessing and curse is that it hasn't received many major updates in a very long time, which leads some people to believe WPF is dead, but I'll have you know it's even getting an update in .NET 8, so it can't be completely dead. Also, Microsoft still has Visual Studio using it, so till that dies, I don't see it dying anytime soon. But there is a lot of good docs here about doing various things. And most of these docs in here are really good. They call out a lot of things that I see people running into of going, how do I do X? How do I do Y? How do I do Z? Right? So let's start with, boy, because we have so many options here of things to do. Again, they have all of these scenarios, and I think these are really good for understanding. And this is why DataGrid is actually awesome, is because it has so much power in here. For example, define cell and row selection behavior, right? So we can, let's just briefly take a look at that. So for example, you can see here, when I am clicking, I am going through, and I'm going to make these things a little bigger. So you can't see it here, and this is somewhat an artifact of the material design library. Maybe we should fix that. There is a separator on the columns that you can grab to separate, but you will note that the behavior of the selection does change slightly. So if we look at the two key properties, selection, hey, selected cells, selection mode, that's what we're going for. So extended versus singular. So think multi-select, single select. So on extended mode, I can control click, and you can see I can pick up multiple items there. I can shift click, pick up a bunch of them, versus if I set this to single, right? Now when I click, control click, you have to actually have it be defined properly. Now when I control click, I'm only getting one item at a time. You're gonna have to just trust me that I'm holding down control while I click, but away we go there, right? The other key one to note is selection unit. Okay, I swear, I'm not this bad at typing. It's just when people watch, I can't type. So selection unit, cell, full row. Oftentimes full row is generally what people expect, right? I'm going through and clicking it, but it does depend on how you want to use the data grid. So a common use case that people will go through is sort of this forms level entry, because this is what it makes sense. However, I have seen cases where people actually set it up more in a grid style, where you want to then go through and say, oh, I'd like to kind of, bounce around. The idea of a row doesn't make a lot of sense. So you can do the individual cell, right? And then you can see the selection bounces between that. So how you set up your selection is also going to end up affecting your how you handle like the selection changed event. The other thing is things like selected index, selected item, selected value. All of these things in here, if you end up doing cell selection, those things can kind of get a little weird. The key thing to note here is that each row in a data grid, regardless of how you set up your selection, is an item from your collection. Right, so I'll say that one more time. Each row in your data grid is an item from your collection. So in this case, in my users class. So each row represents a single user. Every column is a property on that user. Now, the one thing I will tell people, there is oftentimes this desire to just straight up data bind like a DB context straight to a data grid. I really don't like that approach. It is great for quick and dirty. And this is oftentimes something that I see happen quite a bit is people take their data level objects and they directly bind them straight through to in their view models right into the view. That can work. However, what generally ends up happening is you find that's like, well, it'd be really nice if my object that was in the data grid had this extra property or this extra collection or this extra command or whatever, right? It is very common to end up needing to go through and wrap things up in view models, even though it's like, well, but the view models have the exact same properties. It's like, yes, but they serve two different purposes. Even if the starting shape of the wrapping view model looks very similar to your entity, it is often a good place to start, because what I have found in experience is that your entity and the view model wrapping the entity tend to start to diverge over time, and they update at different rates. And so if two things update at different rates, it is okay to duplicate the things, right? When you're trying to decide, like, developers have the mentality of dry, do not repeat yourself. Don't do this. That's bad. It's okay to repeat yourself, right? It should be intentional, right? You shouldn't just blindly, duplicate stuff unnecessarily. But if two things rev at different rates, usually that is a place where duplication actually makes sense, because the anticipation is that over time, one thing's going to update at a different rate than another, right? So all of that stuff. Okay, blah, 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 blah. Okay, we're going to do one other thing. So like alternation count. I don't even know if this is actually, is this even implemented in the material design? I don't know. Fuchsia is the only appropriate color I can think of. Oh, look at that. It is implemented. Huzzah. I didn't remember if we did this. So occasionally you want to go through and make it easier, the alternation count. This also exists on like your list controls as well, as a way of making it easier for users to kind of just keep track of where they are. Generally, you don't want your background color to be, we'll say, quite this dramatic. It's usually just a soft difference. I have never found a use for alternation count not equal to 2. Like, this doesn't make sense. Like I have never seen a use case where this is helpful. I'm sure people will find them. I'm sure there was a request why this is an int and not just a bool. But I have rarely seen the case, and by rarely I mean never, where having an alternation count of not 2 makes any lick of sense at all, right? 1 doesn't make sense. 0 doesn't make sense, right? It's really only valuable for positive integers of 2 or greater. And again, I mean, maybe if you've got something with a base of 10, can you make multiple alterations, different colors? Great question. No, sort of. So we will look at dealing with styling the individual ones in a moment, but the built-in stuff for it just kind of auto magically doing it for you is limited to is limited to just the one color. So you have your default background color and then your alternation count, and that's pretty much it. Okay, and I think we're gonna get. Oh, I want to talk about sizing real quick. So you'll note how I immediately size these things up. So on your columns, you do have the concept of width, and width behaves, if I can navigate to it, you'll note that width is not just a number, it's this enum thingy. So people who are familiar with how grids work in WPF, where you have your fixed value, your star sizing, you'll note this ends up looking real familiar real quick, except for, unlike the regular WPF grid, you have a few extra things, right? You've got the standard auto sizing, you've got pixel sizing, size to cells, size to header, etc., right? Because maybe you want to adjust the default size of your column to this. It is worth noting that if you allow users to change the size, like I was doing with this, this width is an initial value. It's not a fixed value. So, you know, you could end up doing, say, 400, right? And just default it straight up. You can actually do like the 1 star, right? And say, okay, I'm going to take up a percentage of how these things go. And if we do that same thing here with, you know, 2 star, right? We end up with age taking up 1/3 of the space, name taking up 2/3 of it, and you're off to the races. It is worth noting, you probably, in most situations, do want your last column, i.e. the one on the very end, to be a star-sized one in general. Because, for example, if I just do this as 100, oh, hang on, get rid of that. Boom. You'll note here that when so I am clicking on these rows to select them, but you'll note I'm not actually selecting the row. The reason is because the row stops over here. If I come over here, I can click to select, and actually let's selection unit full row, right? So even though my highlight color, and this is probably a flaw in the material design library, even though it makes it look like I can select the row if I click, no selectee. I have to click over here and then I'm selected. So in general, you probably want your outside column to your rightmost column to be something like a 1 star or similar, right? On that note, there are a large number of properties on the data grid, and these ones are worth knowing about. So things like, wow, that's really weird the way the topmost works with this. Oh. Hang on, I can do this. Get it? Can do this? Pun? Okay. So, for example, these guys here. So can user add rows, delete rows, reorder columns, resize rows, can user sort columns. So I believe by default, all of these things default to true, with the exception of can resize rows. I believe that one you actually have to, I may have to turn off the material design library to test this, because that one may not be fully implemented there. It's somewhat of an odd thing to need to resize a row, but it is technically a thing. So quite often when you're working with the data grid, this is one of the areas that I see people mess up on a lot, is they forget that they should go through and turn some of this stuff off. The question is, should users be able to do all of this stuff? Right? Add rows, delete rows. And these are very fine-grained level stuff. The other alternative is read-only, right? So if all you care about is saying data grid, I want to display data, I want the user to be able to, you know, kind of work with the data, but I don't want them to edit it, right? I don't want that clicky thing to get me into it. But, you know, sorting's fine, you know, resize fine, all of that's fine. Is read only is a very quick and dirty way to say, okay, let's get our data grid out of editing mode. As you can see, I've clearly added a row here. So we're going to get rid of that. Can user delete row? True, right? So we can come in here and we can go, okay, we're going to actually delete. So hitting the delete key there actually does delete rows. And again, this is one of those things where you'll see a lot of demos where people will just bind their EF core data set right to their data grid, which is real cool, right? You can take that thing, you can bind directly to the, what is it? The data set has a local property, I believe, that gives you a working set that you can muck with. Makes for some really slick looking demos. Never once done that in a real app. So it demos really well. Quick and dirty apps, proof of concept, maybe, but rarely is that what I want. I almost always want to do something in the middle, right? Because oftentimes users will say, hey, I bound my data set, but what if I want the user to like have to confirm their changes? Like I want them to have to hit save. And what if they hit cancel, I want to revert that. It's like, well, yeah, you're on your own at that point. If you bind straight to your data set, they're editing the data set as they work with this. Sometimes that's exactly what you want. Sometimes you legitimately want to come in here and say, you know what? I'm going to edit the age of user 0, right? And we can take our good pal Snoop, and we can just jump right on in here. And if we take a look at him, we can go to our data context, we can look at our users, and we can say, okay, let's see, users, I just edited user 0, right? Nope. User 1. So we can see user 0 has a value of 42. If I come in here and go 45, right? Boom, boom, boom. You can see that the user actually updates straight to 45. Huzzah. We are off to the races and we are doing great. So it is going to directly manipulate your data set going in here. Let's give ourselves, I just realized I put this guy on top of my menu. There we go. Now I got my menu back. Huzzah. Let's give ourselves really quick a menu item for menu item header. Let's do new user. Command binding new user command. Yeah. Save. Done. Okay, so we're gonna have to kill execution real quick. Let's go add ourselves a new user. Let's see. Private void new user. Make it a relay command. And then we're gonna go users.add new user name gets let's do user, then we're just going to take the count, I think, to make our life a little interesting. Users.count, and then obviously every age of every new user is going to be 42. No, Copilot, we are not going to do your stupid idea. Okay, so I'm going to point this out. I can go new user, and you can see we're getting new users. But this is not the only way I can get users into my data grid. Because I have left that property of user can add rows, I can come right in here and go, 37 and Kevin, and I can just straight up add in a new user. Right? And we look at it in Snoop, because this is probably one of the easier ways for me to just go peruse my data context. Right? If I look at my users and I look at the last one, you'll note there's Kevin, there's my age. Great. So the question that usually comes in the phrase of, hey, how come I've got this extra row at the bottom of my data grid? That's the add new row button. Right? That's the way data grid is built. If you want this to go away, can user add rows? False. And now it's gone. Now, this just means the user can't add rows. That's the magic row. Exactly, Kenny, exactly. The user can't add rows. There's nothing stopping your code from going whoop and just dropping new records right on in and saying, look, I've now magically gotten my users brought into here. Great, right? So there is all of that. Let's see here. So, oh, the one thing I didn't comment here. So there are multiple selected things in here. So there is selected item, but there are more things in here than what are being shown. So let's just give me a X name my data grid. Okay, let's go in here and my data grid. Okay, fine. I will stop execution, stop your whining. Oh, that's not going to exist. That's not my code behind. Let's try it here. Okay, my data grid. So you'll note there are a couple things in here that do not show up when you're looking at it in the XAML designer. Right, so there are selected cells, which you will note comes with a nice little data grid cell info. So you can get some information about the item, where it is, if you want to go through and pull that information back out. Data grid column can be quite helpful if you're like wanting to figure out, how far across you are, the item, whether it's in a valid state. We haven't done validation yet, but that's the thing. So if your selection mode is set to cells, selected cells is what you are probably going to want to work with. However, you will note this is not a data bindable property, right? There is no selected cells property. What you end up having to do, and some people twitch on this, it's okay to use your code behind. That's fine. If you're doing view stuff, code behind is good. You will probably want to bind up to this selected cells changed event, and then respond to that. The other one is selected items. So if you are doing full row select, this is more likely what you want to end up grabbing, because this will end up giving you the individual rows that have been selected. Hot topic, data grid. Yes. I finally caved. More accurately, enough people poked me and I said, fine, I'll do it. So if you are doing selected rows, you want to leverage the selected items. Again, though, you will probably find yourself in your code behind my data grid, watching for selection changed and dealing with that yourself, especially if you have selection mode set to extended. Right? If you have your selection set to single and full row, those conditions, which is somewhat common, right? Full row, single mode, you can data bind a selected item. That one you can bind all the way in to your view model. That's fine. But again, because DataGrid offers all of this complexity around selection, you may end up in your code behind needing to kind of smooth over some of those differences. You'll find various things online as well where people have done like attached properties or similar to kind of deal with the going back and forth between view model and DataGrid. Those are fine if you want to use them, but just know that all they're doing is automating away a little bit of code that you would put in your code behind anyway. Again, code behind is very acceptable in an MVVM setup as long as the code in your code behind is focused on making the view work properly. Right? That it's okay. Right? Don't put your business logic in your code behind. That's the whole reason why we do MVVM. But if you're doing view stuff, manipulating sizes, triggering storyboards, whatever, right? Code behind's fine. If you're doing view stuff, use the view. The view is not just XAML. The view can be code behind plus XAML, which makes it awesome. Let's see. Oh, okay. I will. There is one more here that I should point out. Okay, so I spent enough time lamenting the auto-generate columns and how stupid it is. I will point out there is a mild amount of customization available to you on this. If you would like to use the auto-generate columns because for whatever reason, typing out a few column definitions is hard. Don't understand you, but there is an option to handle this event here. So the auto-generating column event does give you some level of control, and you will see this get called back while it's generating up the the columns for each of your individual properties. So hypothetically, if you wanted to go through and perhaps say, you know what, I'm going to only limit myself and say, you know, I'll create a custom attribute that's, you know, called hidden, right? Debugger hidden. We'll just use that for purposes, even though it doesn't work, right? In theory, you can come in here and say, okay, well, I know my property type. I know my property name. I can do some reflection-y stuff to determine whether I want to set this canceled flag to true and prevent that column from being added. So you can then go through and say, well, maybe I can write some fancy data grid stuff so that when it's generating the columns, I'm going to prevent particular columns from being shown. That way I don't have to write out all of, you know, these data grid columns for each of my properties. I can still leverage the auto stuff, but then rather than doing that, I'll put in some reflection-y stuff. If you want to do that, have at it. Again, Kevin's strong bias is just declare the columns you want. It's so much nicer. Okay. Oh, and on the note of columns, let's see here, because we have, let's give ourselves a couple more properties to play with. So let's see, how about we do, you know what? Here's what we're going to do. Public GUID ID, right? We're just going to do that. Okay. So read-only property. Yeah. So these ones are read-write properties because that's what the source generator for observable property generates. This we're going to do just a straight read-only property. We are going to come over here. We are going to go whoop, and we're going to go, man, I got to fix that indentation problem. This is getting annoying. And we're going to do ID. Right. And then we are going to do, I don't know, width, really bloody big. And then width, really bloody big. Okay, there we go. And then we're going to restart this guy. Okay, so I have a data grid. You can see, woo, lots of stuff. A common thing that often happens, especially if you've got IDs or something here, there's occasionally this idea that you want to pin particular columns that are available to you. So there is a frozen column count, and we can bump that up to a 1. And you'll note, as soon as I bump my frozen column count up to 1, take note of what happened to this horizontal scroll bar. So it intentionally has inset itself a little bit so that when I scroll, my IDs stay visible on the left side, but I'm now able to, you know, still up and down, they move, but when I scroll horizontally, I end up keeping these IDs here. This can be really helpful. Maybe building out like some sort of work item management, like what you see in maybe Azure DevOps, where you want to like keep the IDs pinned or similar. Worth noting, you can go through and leverage something to that effect. I'm going to turn this off for the moment because I also want to demo something else. Because I have this, I can actually reorder my columns. I don't know if anyone can see the little blue bar that's showing up. If I can capture it. Oh, it's so... Yeah, there it is. Ha 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 ha. Problem is I'm stuck in it. I don't want to... I want to get around it, and it's killing me. Anyway, in the material design with my styling, it's showing up as blue. I think the blue is an artifact of system colors. That's probably also a bug. I don't believe we are setting that as part of our theming colors, which is probably not good, but anyway, so reordering columns, again, there's that can property here for can user reorder columns, right? So as soon as I take that and set it to false, my ability to take the age column and drag it around immediately disappears off the face of the planet. So if you don't want users changing your columns, that would be a good option as well. Let's see, what am I missing? Selected items, customizing end user interaction with the can properties. Sizing mode. Oh yeah, so I will say this, on the sizing mode there are concepts of like min width, and I've often found that even when you allow users to resize things like the age, it's generally a nice thing to set a min width so that they can't do this kind of thing. Hey, Andrew, welcome. Yeah, I've been pinged enough times about people wanting to do data grid, so we're just gonna dive all the way through this thing because there is so much functionality in here. Good morning from Germany. Adonis, Adipose. Sorry, I read the second half of your name, Adipose, and I immediately go Doctor Who, and I'm hoping that's either a reference or I'm not misusing the word. I will say I have found having some level of minimum width on a lot of these so that users can't. Oh, hush now. Yeah, shut up. I realized that I missed a thing, but you're hiding it from me. Preventing users from being able to completely drop your column size to 0. So oftentimes I have set min width on the vast majority of my columns because it just prevents users from doing something stupid. Let them go small if they want. Like it's not a big deal to let a user make a column unreadable, but letting the user make the column effectively gone means that it's very difficult. Big size body. It makes it very difficult for them to get into a thing. So my opinion, a min width is probably a good idea unless you have an explicit width or something set on there. But if you let users resize, it's probably a worthwhile thing to do. Yeah, customize. Okay, so let's get into some more of this stuff. Okay, so next area of the data grid. So for people who do is read only on their data grid, your life is easy, right? Is read only true. The number of things you have to think about when you set data grid to read only true shrinks dramatically. It cuts more than in half, right? You've given up more than half of the functionality in the data grid by setting is read only true. Because now all you're worried about is like sizing, reordering, filtering, that kind of stuff. Great. You've just thrown away most of the functionality. Not a bad idea. It can be useful. Right? Like maybe you legitimately just want to display the data in a helpful way to the user. That's fine. Have fun with it. Enjoy it. Right? But with read only false, this is where we get into this case where I can start edit. Okay, I need to make yeast sizing big mode, not big mode anymore. Okay. With is read only false, the default, users are able to then go through and start editing the content inside of each of your rows, which is great. The important thing to note here is, so again, each row in your data grid represents an object from your bound collection. Each column represents a property from that object, right? So I've got a user object. The user object has ID, age, and name. Oh, and yes, good shout out to Andrew. Hang on. I got you, Andrew. I got you. Coding, YouTube. People who, if anybody does WinUI stuff, go give Andrew a follow. He deserves it. But inside of here, this means that every single cell in your data grid has two states. It's a read-only state and it's editing state. And in my case, just clicking into the cell is giving me a text box because I've used a text column versus a text block, which is just rendering the data. And you'll note the data grid is trying to be mildly helpful. Oh yeah, read-only doesn't work. Here's another reason why this sucks. Because apparently when you try to go edit mode on a read-only property, it no worky. So pro tip, mode one way. Let's try that again. This is another good reason to build out these things properly. Okay, so now I click here. Good, we no longer break. But when I click here, I can go through and do it. The other option, I believe, isn't there a Yeah, is read-only true. So you can turn individual columns read-only as well. If you want to like say, you know what, well, we're only going to let them edit the age, but you know what, your name is fixed. Nobody ever renames themselves. So something to that effect. Either setting the binding so that it appropriately respects the read-onlyness of our property, or making the column read-only, or whatever. Right? Because the problem being is the mode of your bindings is based upon the target property, and the default mode of a text box is two-way. The problem with two-way is if your property is a read-only, well, it can't go the other direction. It can only call the get. There is no set to invoke, so that no working. Okay, so 2 states to this. Now, you can customize pretty much everything about your data grid cells, and you can customize both sets of states depending on how you want to go about it. So, for example, let's imagine we decide, you know what? One of the things I would really love to do is I would love to have a column over here that, I don't know, deletes a row. Let's do that. That sounds like fun. Right? So we can do a data grid column, and if we look at what we've got, the problem is a column that has a delete the thingy isn't real helpful, right? Because the built-in stuff, we've got ComboBox, checkbox, text, a button's none of those things. Let's go with template column, right? So a template column, and actually we're going to give it an empty header. Maybe we call it actions. I don't know. Do something like this, right? So a template column is where you start to get the idea of what actually the data grid is capable of. So, man, this indentation is really starting to annoy me. Oh, look at that. Are you going to write all the code for me? Oh, that's pretty good. Show off Copilot. Okay, so Copilot's going to write some code for us and demonstrate how to do this. Thank you, Copilot. You are the kid in the back of the class who's always shooting his hand up. Okay. Freaking show off. And it spoiled the ending as well. So you'll note this thing, Copilot has very helpfully determined that what we might want to do is edit users and delete users. You know what, Copilot? You're dumb. We're not going to do that. Ha. But what we have here is the cell template of a column represents the controls when this cell is in the read-only state, right? But we haven't actually created an editable state for this. So when we get over to here, this cell doesn't do anything, right? There is no other option. Okay, Copilot, would you like to write the next one? No? Okay, fine. I'll be the real developer. So cell template, cell editing template. This guy here, we can go in and do this as well. Let's do editing. I don't know. Just so that we have something different to look at. This could be anything else, right? So we could have, when I double click to get myself into the editing state, you'll note that the secondary template fires. I get my editing button, and it's basically the same as the delete for all practical purposes, but you now have complete control over what the template of your cell is going to look like, both in the editing mode and in the cell mode. Let's see, random question, been learning .NET MAUI. I referenced the model in my XAML and the data template. Is that bad? Reference the model in my XAML and my data template. Is that bad? No, but I'm just going to clarify a couple details. One, when you say model, I'm assuming you're talking about data entity. Like if you've got a database behind the scenes, the model object that actually represents your underlying data, whether that comes from a web API, a database, or whatever. It's not bad, and oftentimes it's perfectly acceptable. The place where it gets somewhat bad is the moment you start doing editing with it, because there is a difference of roles between a view model object and a model object. Those are two separate, they serve two different purposes. With that said, an MVVM purist might say, oh, that's horrible, don't do that. Pragmatically, it's fine. The thing to be cautious of, though, is the moment you start to find that you need to put things into that model that feel very view model like, making properties observable, adding commands, those types of things. That's the point where you probably don't want to directly reference your model anymore, and instead you want to wrap it up in a view model object so that you can put that additional functionality there. That's usually a better option to go through and do it. So, but again, there's not necessarily a hard and fast rule about don't ever do this, because it's perfectly fine. I've written code fairly recently where I was getting data back from a web API. We took that data, we threw it into an observable collection and bound up a list to it. Was that bad? Not really. It's a read-only list. I needed to display the data. Done. Right? You're off to the races. So it depends a lot on what you're doing with it. And like I said, I usually would just say the moment you find that you need to add extra stuff to your model to support the view, that's the point where you should stop using the model in your XAML and wrap it in a view model. Great question, though. Okay, so oftentimes when working with the data grid, people will get hung up. These other column types, text grid, ComboBox, checkbox, those are all there as convenience things. Yeah, I'm going to go with convenience things, because having to write this much code for every single column would be insane, especially for some really common use cases of I got a little bit of text. Right? Or I've got a single property, it just needs a text box, let the user type, I don't want to think too hard, right? This, I think, is much more clear as to how the data grid actually works, right? For your column, you've got a cell template, you've got a cell editing template. If you're going to make it read-only, right, you don't need the editing template. You can't get to it. It doesn't matter. If you don't specify a cell editing template, the edit mode and the cell mode are going to be the same. That's fine too, right? But it gives you that level of control to go through and tweak it. And especially in cases where people say, well, insert column name here, the text column doesn't do X. I really would like it to do X without me having to do a lot of work. It's like, sorry? At that point, you probably are jumping straight from helper column to template column, where you have full control over literally everything. You get to define the template, make it work as much as you want. Another thing to be aware of is Copilot didn't do this for me, which immediately gives me a reason to mock it, because Copilot deserves to be mocked. Let's see. So if I do local user, right? When doing data templates, it is a good idea to specify up your data type, just so that some of these bindings, when you do this, now you get IntelliSense on what this is. You'll also get nice errors. If a data template with a data type is defined and you try to apply it to a different type of object, the data template will yell at you and go, what are you talking about, you moron? It's nicer than that. I'm not allowed to write error messages for people because I would make them a little more blunt than they probably should be. Okay. And actually, this is a great example here that we're going to pick on. So if we were to go through and build this out, you'll note that this delete user command, this is somewhat problematic because we've put a delete command here. And you'll note by definition of how the data grid is structured, each row is a user object. And so the moment you want to put a command here, it's like, well, does that mean that in my user, I should actually be doing something like relay command, public void, delete something? But then it's like, how do you actually implement this relay command? That doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, does your user object need to know how to delete itself from a parent collection? That feels a little awkward. especially since I can always like highlight the row and go, you know, delete key on my keyboard and poof, it's gone, right? I've allowed can user delete rows, so that always works. This feels awkward, right? How do I make this work? The better way, and Copilot has cleverly cheated and shown off the ending because it's a show off, is to go through and say, well, because what we actually want to do is create a delete user command, and the ideal place for the delete user command to live is actually in our main window view model, the parent of this, right? That's where we want this to live. So if we come up here and actually implement it, we can do relay command. Really? You want to go? Thanks, Cope. You show off. Freaking AI. Thank you, Copilot. That's exactly correct. You're still a show off. No one likes you, except for most people do. Dumb show off, Copilot. Okay, so let's pretend that we want to go through and we want to whack Joe out of existence. And I'm going to put a breakpoint here just so we can see it. I can click the delete. We now land on this delete user. It has passed the user in. User removed from observable collection. Poof, user's gone. Huzzah. This is a common thing that occurs quite a bit, especially when building up data grids, is needing to understand the subtle difference of how your data context is changing. This is one of those areas that I get a lot of questions from people on, because they get inside, well, they start with the text column where it's very simple. I bind to my property, everything works. They then realize, oh shoot, I need something mildly complex. I have to go to a data template column. I go to a data template column and I don't realize that my data context has subtly changed. And so now I am actually acting on the user object, and I need to do all of this stuff. And then because my data context is my user object, well, how do I get to my parent view model? This is fairly common to have to go through and do. And actually, this also exists for things like list box and list views as well, where you are acting inside of a data template that represents an individual item in a collection. But you want that individual item to be able to reach up and execute commands from a parent object or bind to an object in the parent one. This is also really common if you want to implement like context menus, right? If you want to right-click delete. In order to be able to do something like that, you would need to be able to have it reach up to the parent context to be able to go through and grab that information. So just be aware of that. And then the command parameter, this is just binding to the data context. And in this case, the data context is the user, hence how it goes all the way through and just magically works. So keep in mind that difference with collections when you're working with them and being able to reach up. The big disadvantage here is anytime you have to go binding data context dot. Let me show, I'll just show this here, right? Is it not going to show it to me? Come on. Is it going to show me anything? It might not show me anything. Is you end up losing your IntelliSense and your XAML checking. So for example, if I go up here and on this thing, I decide to do, right, I'm going to implement delete user here, and I do delete user command, I get nice IntelliSense. And I get nice IntelliSense here because I have set up my design time. That's what this D colon here at the means. Anything with D colon at the beginning means design time property. Doesn't exist at runtime, only here to make the designer happy. I have told it that at design time, my data context is going to be a main window view model. And by the way, don't bother calling its constructor. Just use reflection to look at what the properties are. That's all I want you to do. Right? That's functionally what this is doing. Is it's telling the designer, hey, here's what my data context will be at runtime. Don't worry about it. Trust me on this one. It'll be a main window view model. Give me good IntelliSense. Now, the problem being here that data context, the data context property down on framework element in WPF is of type object. So when you do data context dot, you're effectively going object dot. Now, we as programmers, we can infer very simply and go, oh, well, the data context is a main window view model. It should know that delete user command exists on here, right? It has no idea. It goes, I don't know, it's some object. Maybe that property exists. It's like, worthless. So this is one of the kind of big disadvantages in my mind. Some of the newer frameworks try to make this better for you and not have it suck quite so badly. WPF, remember, this was written to XAML spec ye old, right? We are coming up, we are about ready to measure WPF's age in 2 decades. We are coming up on 2 decades of WPF. That's a long time. It means it's stable. Also means it hasn't seen a major rev anytime. And I don't expect it to get a major rev anytime soon. So, but just be aware, this is the way to reach up and do it. You do lose IntelliSense by going through data context, but oftentimes inside of collections, this is the appropriate way to be able to reach back and grab that information. Okay, we've got that, we've got that. This is also a convenient way to say, for example, if I want to do background red, all right, so we do that. Fire this guy back up. Sorry, my coworkers are doing things. Okay, so we're going to give a little bit of margin around this guy just so we can see it, because it's already, this row is already too tall. Okay, so this is worth mentioning here as well. So inside of here, you'll note I have set the background color to red on my stack panel. You will, however, note that when we look at this guy, and you are annoying when I do that, zoom it. Oh, it's because of the topmost thing. Hang on, we can do this. I'm going to put you over here. I'm going to do this. There, fine, so be it. It is really annoying the way it handles on top windows and does cursor hitting. The red around the outside of this is still inset a little bit, because you'll note the cell itself, when I click on the cell, you can see this white border around the outside. This is actually the size of the cell. But when I set my background color here to red, I am not able to set the full background color of my cell. Maybe because this is delete, I actually want my whole cell to be red to kind of strongly hint to the user, hey, by the way, this is bad. And in fact, let's do that down here. All right, we'll say, oh, when we go in edit mode, right, we want this thing to be, ye big, and go through and show that. And actually, we're just going to delete the stack panel off this top one. It's not serving any purpose. There's only one item left, whatever. Okay. But when we go in edit mode, we want the red, but what we would really rather have is the red for the cell, not for the individual item inside of it. So we're going to keep going, and I'm going to keep picking on the DataGrid data template. It's worth noting, you can get to these same type of properties on the other cell types as well. Let's see, DataGrid template column, cell style. Okay. So, and again, this also is very similar to what you will get if you do this in like a list box or similar. Sorry, my brain just turned off for a moment and I had to like reprocess what my world was doing. So let's see, X type, data grid cell. Yeah, there we go. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, so real quick explanation for people who haven't seen WPF styles before. This is quite common. So style, you set the target type that the style is going to be applied to. In this case, we're working in a data grid. So these are data grid cells, list box item, list view item, etc. And then this based on is effectively there so that we don't throw away the style. So in WPF, inheritance isn't automatic. You have to explicitly opt in to deriving from a base. That's the right mentality for developers. So when you say based on, you're effectively setting the base style that you want your style to derive from. So oftentimes I will get bugs on the material design library where people go, I applied my own style and then the material design one went away. It's like, yeah, you didn't opt into inheritance. You got to actually set your base one on. And doing a based on targeting an X type is the way to say, look up the style that is targeting the implicit type of X data grid. You can also type in an explicit key if there's a name to it. But this is a fairly simple one. If instead we go here and we go property and we do background and we do value red, right? You can see now we have successfully gone through and said, perfect. Now our whole cell's background is red. This is great, but this is not actually what we're going for. We only wanted it red when we were actually in, edit mode. So let's actually change that. So if we go style trigger, let's see, we can do a trigger and we can do property and we can go is editing, right? So value true. Really, Copilot, you're just going to show off? Fine, you close the trigger. I'm not helping you. Right, you're going to do it all by yourself, like a big boy. Okay, so Copilot has decreed that when editing, that's green. Copilot's an idiot. Deleting is clearly a red operation. Learn your colors, Copilot, and then we're going to get rid of this stack panel too because we don't need it now that we've got our thing going. So now whenever we get ourselves into an editable cell, we can go through and we can actually say, oh, okay, let's go through and change this such that we now get a background of red. This sort of control with this style now gives you access to the entire data grid cell to play with. So rather than being the template inside of the cell, you can now edit properties that are actually at the cell level. So being able to change things like alignment, for example, is a kind one. I like the levels of personification for Copilot. Me and Copilot have a love-hate relationship. I love to hate it. But I also like it when it saves me time. There are the days where you have to laugh because it's ridiculous. So, for example, let's imagine on these age and name columns that we've so cleverly bound up here, or even our ID column. We can see here that when we put these things in, everything was fine right up until we added this button. And now that we've added this button, these things are no longer aligned, like they're all top aligned. And my personal opinion, they'd look better if they were all centered aligned. Now, we could go through and we could drop all of these text columns for data template columns and re-implement all of text column ourselves. But at the end of the day, all we actually care to do is change some alignment inside of these things, right? So it's like, well, we could go through and change everything. The other thing is if, say, we don't like how big the red border is, right? I believe that's coming from property. Or by property, I mean the property padding, because that was clearly what I was going for. We could go through and we could set the padding value to 0. We've now lost our red border, but we could do something a little nicer, maybe give it a 2 or 3 or 4. I don't know. 4 looks kind of good. Let's go bigger. 6. There. But obviously, the bigger I make this, the more that this ends up causing this offset. So if we go up to our text column here, we can end up doing something similar, right? Let's see. Close it for me, please. Thank you. Let's do, I am really going to have to play with my white space settings because this is really annoying the crap out of me. Text column, cell style, boom, boom, boom. And I'm just gonna steal this real quick. But if I go ahead and drop this guy in here, let's see, data grid cell, and we're gonna get rid of the triggers because we don't want that. But what I would like to do is I would like to set, for example, vertical content alignment, and I would like it to be center. So now I've kind of pushed that down a little bit. That didn't quite center all the way. How about vertical alignment? There we go. That lines up a little nicer. Just to get that thing set the way I want. Now again, you'll note here there's something subtle that's happening. Because I have changed the vertical alignment of the cell, my white border is now inset from where it was. Versus if we do vertical content alignment, right? Now we're aligned inside of here. The content has been vertically aligned, right? Still not perfect, but if we look at it in Snoop, we can sort of discern what's happening. So if I go here, right, we can see inside, so on the left here, so right, we've got our data grid row, which is the whole row that we're in. Inside of that, we've got a cell, and inside of the cell, we have a text block, right? That's what we're ultimately looking at. We can see that this text block here, if we look at its vertical alignment, we can see its vertical alignment is set to stretch, whereas our data grid cell is now got its vertical content alignment set to center. So the content of the cell has been centered, but the content of the cell is this grid, and this grid ultimately contains our text block, and that doesn't quite have it. So if we really wanted to center it, we would need to come all the way down to here and say, well, by the way, I would like you to be vertically aligned, center there, and then we start to get the behavior that we're actually looking for, right? So we come in here, let's see, I think, is there a helper property for this? There's not. So we'd have to actually dive all the way in to get at this. Data grid, element style. We can go style, target type, text block, because the and this time we don't really need, I don't really care about it based on. And then we can do setter, property, vertical alignment, value. You had it there for a second, Copilot, and I'm sorry, I didn't auto tab. So we can actually come down a little further because we don't have to go through and completely jump to the data template column yet, right? The cell style gives us some level of access to the cell itself, right? But our white border is now all the way around. But if we want to set the style, again, not the template inside the content presenter, but the style of the element itself, which in this case is a text block. The target type of the style inside of an element style will change depending upon your column type. Because, for example, a ComboBox column, your element style will be a ComboBox. But this will let you get all the way in, and then we can see here that then this has magically aligned. We probably don't even need the cell template outside. This is not really buying us much, but worthwhile proof of concept, right? To be able to go through and center align this. So oftentimes the question comes through of people saying, hey, you know, I want to tweak something about the text column, but I don't want to fully change it. Right? This gets you a good portion of the way there most of the time. Right? So you can go through and do this. Okay. So we've got that. We implemented that. There is a major disadvantage here in that we would end up having to do this same ugly thing. And actually, let's show this on age. Right? So we do here and there, like that, right? So age is now aligned, but you'll note what happens, right? The age column is perfectly aligned. The element style works. And then I edit it. And that sucks. And this is where DataGrid starts to show the subtle complexities. Again, it's not that bad if you understand styling elements and how to get access to nested children and all of that. It's not bad to work with. But in order to use this data grid effectively, you kind of have to bite off a lot of WPF and MVVM concepts that may be foreign. I've often told people that MVVM is a steep learning curve and worth it. Right? Steep learning curve, but worth it. You can do with that what you will. So if we want to go through here, let's see here. Data grid. Text column. editing element style, right? So we can do this whole thing all over again. Style, target type, text box. And in this case, I do want to make sure that I'm picking up the base style because I know that material design is doing a lot of the heavy lifting on that. So we want to pick that up. Text box. And then I can come in here, vertical alignment center, boom. What are you squawking about? What did I miss? Oh, it's not my fault, Copilot. You didn't close your element. If you're gonna write code, write it all. So now when I actually go into the editing style, we stay nice and centered. So again, if we wanted to repeat this same process for the name column, you rinse, repeat, and do it over. Now, you can pull these styles out into resources, right? So we could come up here. If this is, and maybe we do it actually at the data grid level. That's probably better. Datagrid.resources. Let's see. And we're going to go with, if I was doing this and my data grid, and I didn't want to end up having to repeat myself multiple times, right? I do X key read only text style. Right, so I would set something like that up, and then what that enables me to do is I can do element style here, and then I can just go static resource, boom, and then we throw this away. And then if I want to repeat the same thing on the name column, now I have a nice easy way. I can just do that. Right, and the same thing for the element editing style is you can always pull things like these styles up a little bit, put them in a resource dictionary, give them a friendly key, and then reference them in both places. And that is, I think, the easiest way to get all of your columns behaving the way you want. Again, styles have inheritance. So you can always, if you need, kind of a base style, derive for a couple of them or whatever you need to do, great. Have at it. Have fun. But then it gives you some level of being able to kind of control all of this as well. Okay, so I think all of that makes sense. Am I missing anything? I kind of think what we might do is, oh, I do love how the auto update didn't handle these ones down here. That was pretty epic. Let's change this one up to be a little more realistic. If we do this instead rather than a button, what we might do is we might just do a text block, text, edit, what is it? Text decorations, underline, foreground, blue, cursor, and there, boom. I.e., look like a link. Alice blue isn't really. Let's do like navy. There we go. That's a little dark. What's blue look like? That's ugly to look at. How about, sorry, coloring's important. Light blue. Yeah, that'll work. There. So then it's not really clear that you have to double click, but you know what? We're going to go with that for now. It at least gives me closer to the feel that we're kind of going for with this data grid. So styling for all of your columns and all of your types. There you go. Have at it. The other one that I'm going to point out is the headers. Right. So we have currently only gone through and set header equal to a fixed string. Right? And this is another one that comes up a lot. It occurs a lot in WPF, is people oftentimes see XAML like this and assume that all that they can set into the header is a string, right? But when we look at the header property itself, the header property is actually of type object. This is kind of a telltale sign that you can put whatever you want in there. So what I mean by that is you're gonna, if rather than doing ID, right, we can come down here, data grid text column header, and we can do something like a stack panel orientation horizontal. Right, maybe what we'll do is let's see, Material design pack icon. What? Undefined prefix. Well, that doesn't sound good. Why does my template not default to having material design defined for me? Feels like a mistake. One that should probably be fixed. Oh, define it for me. Thanks. Great. Let's see. Pack icon. And do we have some sort of ID card? That sounds great. So we'll do ID card, and then we'll do, text block, text, ID. Right? So we can clean it up a little bit, and then, put a little space on that. Something like that, right? So if you want to go through the same type of thing that you can do with the cell styling and templating can be applied to the header. So you do have the ability here of just slapping in whatever the heck you want, and can go through and do that. The last one that I want to point out is that there is a concept of row styling as well. So remember, a row is an individual object from our collection. So if we go all the way back up to the data grid. Yeah, so data grid row style, right? So we can do style, target type, data grid row, and we can do based on same thing. This should hopefully look familiar at this point. Data grid row. Boom. Right, so we can go through and do, no, stop helping me. How about a style trigger? Because I think the most common one is when row is selected, I want to do something. I don't know what, right? So trigger property is selected, right? Sure, apparently we're going to use red for the selected row color. All right, so now as we go through and change our rows, the selected color for the row is being changed. Again, you can kind of have fun with this and do whatever you'd like, but it gives you access to yet one more level of the data grid. So in terms of like background coloring stuff, you've got the cells, which have their own editing styles and templates as well. So you've got at least two levels. No, you've got the cells content template in both editing and view mode. You've got the cell itself that you can apply a style to. You can then go up to the row and set a style on the individual row, or you can go all the way up to the data grid and set, background color all the way at this level. Right, so you can change this up in whatever way makes sense. But it's worth noting that there are that many levels of complexity that you can go through and do. And maybe rather than is selected, is editing. Right, so not if the row is selected, but if the user decides, they're going to start editing something in the row, then we're going to turn it red, right? We can toggle these types of things. And I'm not going to necessarily dive into every property on everything on the data grid. I think typically editing and selection are probably the most common ones to go through and use. They're the most common ones that I use, at least. So we'll be biased in favor of that. Okay. Styling, selection, auto generation, all of that stuff. Okay, what else is interesting to go through and cover with all of this? I'm just going to kind of mention a couple things. So, and I'll put this link back in the chat if anybody wants to play along at home. So this data grid section in the docs is, in my opinion, actually very good. And I think it's very good because WPF has had, enough years for people to write good docs on it. But, for example, validation. This is interesting. It's not overly interesting to me because most of it is the same validation that you would do elsewhere, right? So anytime you've done MVVM style validation, the data grid isn't special, right? Once you grok the idea of the cell editing and cell styles and those templates, and you realize that all you have is a text box inside of it, and all the data grid is giving you is automatically kind of flipping between those modes and forwarding the data in for you. The validation really just follows the standard binding validation. Nothing fancy. That's it. So worth calling that out there. Yeah, there's plenty of other useful ones in here. Grouping, sorting, filtering, all that jazz. Have at it. I do want to go through and specifically call out a couple of things that the material design library does, because I think they are especially relevant. So we're going to start here. So there is a data grid text column specifically for coming in here and being able to get the max length set inside of here. So if we go here, right, so we had so if rather than the text column for name, for example, we will do material design. You'll know this thing derives from the text column, so it gets us most of the way there, right? And so if we relaunch this guy, because I don't trust it to be correct. Okay, so for the most part, it looks basically the same in terms of this guy here. However, it does also come with a small convenience for something like max length, right? So I can go through and do max length of 4 for what it's worth. So let's see, that was name. Let me relaunch that because it's explicitly not a bindable property because it's only set once. So you'll note I cannot add, I can delete, but then if I just do this, I get capped at 4. So minor convenience thing. You can also get at it via the editing style. It's just a convenience way of going through and doing that. And again, it's intentionally not data bound for a reason. Okay, let's talk about ComboBox for a moment, because this is the other one I think that bites people a lot. So let's do this. So public list string, how about user types? All right, we'll do something like this. We'll do something like this. We'll do new list. And then we'll say, I don't know, admin and standard. I can't type. And talking is also apparently difficult. Data grid master. I wouldn't go with data grid master. I have argued with the data grid enough. Okay, so let's imagine here that we want to give ourselves one more column, and we're gonna do data grid ComboBox column. Right, and we'll do header type. Now you'll note here, actually, let's go ahead and give ourselves observable property to work with. Observable property, public string type. We'll just do that for the moment. Okay, so type, selected item binding type. So it's important to note here that when you set up these things like the text column with these bindings, you're creating a binding object, setting that binding object on the column, and then the column, when cells are being created, is going to apply that binding to the elements inside of the cell. Right? So it's a little weird in that you have to remember, even though you're setting the binding on the column, and the column is at the data grid level, so it's kind of our main window view model context. But the context under which this binding is actually going to be applied is going to be the individual rows. Conceptually, I think it makes sense, but oftentimes people forget that that's the mental gymnastics our heads are jumping to, and it can be difficult to do. Here's where things get kind of interesting, right? So if I want to do binding, and I want to do, what did I call it? User types? Binding user types, right? So we can do that. I think is, yeah, user types there. Okay, launch this guy up. Okay, so all of our types are empty. And you'll note our binding is not working. This is annoying. This is very annoying. Let us look at why our binding is not working. So if we come in here, and we can probably actually see it here in our binding errors, right? So binding path, user types, data grid, combo box, column, item source. Cannot find governing framework element, frame type, content element for thing. Binding fails, right? That's annoying, because functionally what we would really like to have happen is we would really like to have the item source for our combo box apply at the root view model, and we'd like the selected item binding to apply at the individual row item level, right? That's somewhat common. Now, one workaround, right? So we can cheat this. We can say, oh, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're just going to do this, right? And we'll just put the collection inside of each individual one of these guys, right? And then when we get very confused as to why the combo box binding doesn't pick it up. Did I do something wrong? It should be finding it. Grumble, grumble, grumble. Why am I an idiot? Hang on. I am not as dumb as I look. Because I remember this is the problematic case, and so for reference documentation on DataGrid, combo box column, blah 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 blah. Right. So I'm trying to remember what the solution is for this, but I'm gonna jump to the end because combo box column painful. So we don't want to do this. We want the other way to actually work. So rather than trying to beat that way into submission and make it work. So material design combo box column. So if we go and look at this guy here, the material design library, and that font is tiny, my apologies. You will note that it has a item source binding that we can apply at the column level, because this is on the column. And then it is going to go through and set that binding as the item source property on the combo box. Right, so we can come here and we want to do item source binding, right? Now we launch. Then if the world has been a happy place, I'm now just straight up confused. Oh, because it still has okay. Again, not as dumb as I look. Not quite as dumb as I look. Okay. So now we have a binding that works. Huzzah. Right. We can go through and change, you know, some users around. None of the users have this preset on them, so none of this actually matters, but you know, we can go through and set this up. If we want to make the other way work and reach all the way up, because this binding is being applied at the cell level, right? The same manner under which we do this kind of garbage, right? What you can do is you can come in here and do this and do user types, and then we can get rid of this, and then we can launch. And then you can question why your debugger is dying. And then we can see here, once again, we have this working. Our user does not contain the list of items. The set of items in our combo box is up above. Now, you don't always need to do this. Sometimes you legitimately want the drop down for your combo box items to be things that are specific to a user, right? You don't necessarily have a common set of things that should always be displayed here. I think having a common set of things is the most common case, pun intended. But there are cases that I've run into where I do want, you know, something that's going to be specific to each individual row, right? It's context sensitive. You know, maybe maybe users who are named Joe, you know, get extra options because we like Joes for whatever reason. But if you end up needing to reach up, so the material design library does offer a mild amount of convenient stuff that allows you to specify this. Oh, and I want to show the selected item bindings just to prove that that was working. So if we go users and we look at our first one, we can see that the type is set to admin. Huzzah, that's what we expect. If we go down and grab the third user, we can see type is still unset. If we come in here and change it to admin, right, goes through and updates, and it's worth knowing. I don't know if it was caught here. Let me just back up and show that one more time, because this is another area of confusion for some people. Is you'll note I've set the user type, right, to standard. But it's not until I actually go through and commit this row, because you'll note I've now changed, 23. And we're going to name this user Bob, except for we're going to spell Bob with an O, right? The user has not been updated yet, right? Once I actually commit the row, then it goes through and does it. In your code behind your my data grid, the edit. So there are a handful of events that do fire around when editing is starting, when it is being committed, when it is being rejected. The data grid does have the concept of being able to say, foo, right? And then I escape. If I hit the escape key on my keyboard, it does have the concept of, what is the word? It's not commit, revert, undo, not commit. Not commit. We're going with that. Not commit the value and go back to where it was. If you need to hook discard, thank you. That sounds much better. See, this is how you know it's getting late. I've forgotten what English words mean. But if you do need to end up hooking into those types of things, there are events on your data grid to go through and grab, right? So if that is something that you need to do, because occasionally what will happen with your data grid is you'll want to maybe, if the user changes a value that might have a lot of consequences, you might want to prompt them in the middle and say, hey, are you really sure you want to do this? Like, this could be bad, right? Those types of things are quite common to be able to prompt things for. Watching for those edits are important to be able to know when they're actually going to go through and change. So just be aware that even though the binding is binding directly to your user object, those bindings aren't being told to commit their value until the commit actually happens. So for what it is worth. Okay, what have I missed? What have I missed in all of this stuff? We covered that. We covered that. Yeah, I think that more or less covers where I was hoping to go with data grid. So this has been, 90 minutes of futzing with a data grid just to kind of cover the features of it. Again, my opinion, this is the most complex control that's built into the box. Yeah. Use it, have fun, but use it with care. And again, those docs pages are actually fairly good. It's one of the nice parts about WPF not changing. I will point out a couple more things real quick while I'm here. So I have started a branch. Nikolai and I have gone back and forth now a couple times on my multi-select tree view, which has been a wonderful thing that has occupied, I think I'm up to 5 streams on it. I decided to not do more of it. I think people are probably sick of seeing multi-select tree views. We're getting really close though. We're getting close. So if people are interested, the more move case is the current latest on where that is at. There are a handful of cases that still don't work quite right, and I need to write a bunch more tests to cover them, but we're getting very, very, very close. very close. And I'll probably do at least a small touch on that control once it goes in, kind of showing off what it is and how it works, because I suspect it will be one that will raise some questions on how to use it, because it's kind of a tree view, but it's not. It's a list view. And so I suspect people will want to use it and then have questions on why there's some, it masquerades as a tree view, and not all tree view functionality is going to be there. Most of it will be, but not all. And so you kind of have to treat it like a list view that masquerades as a tree view, not a real tree view. So yeah, that's where that's sitting, and hopefully that goes in. I think the only other thing I'm planning on doing then before kicking the 5.0 release is the longer I think about it, I think I am going to move the wiki inside of the main repo in a docs folder or similar. That way it's a little easier for people to submit PRs for changes and updates and that kind of thing. I think it's just the easiest path of both worlds. And then links to the README, and I want to write a migration guide for the 5.0 stuff, because there's enough in there that I suspect anybody who's doing theming stuff will probably benefit from knowing all of the stuff that is in the 5.0 release, because there's a decent amount in there. So I think with that, I am probably going to wrap up for the night. I've got like 50 things I'm supposed to do before tomorrow, and I haven't started any of them. Good news is it's only 10:40 in the evening. What could go wrong? I've got like 5 hours before bed. But I should actually accomplish things and then sleep at a hopefully decent hour. So thank you everyone for coming and hanging out. Hopefully this was helpful for anybody wanting to know on the DataGrid stuff. As always, if I've missed anything, there's questions, things people were hoping to see, drop me a line, leave it in the comments, message me on the repos, Discord, whatever. My socials have apparently been turned off this whole time, which has been exciting. And they're being covered up by Intellitek's logo. There we go. Apparently I didn't have those on this whole time, so that's awesome. They're going there. I can find them. Yeah, it won't take you long to figure out my URL scheme. It's really simple. Kaboo.dev will get you all my links. So, as always, happy coding. See everyone next time.